There's a common denominator that all safe states have. They're the places where people sleep better at night. Shootings and beatings don't dominate the local news. You don't have to worry about your car getting broken into. And likely, you don't have to worry when you drop your kids off at school either. The best states in America are the places where you want to raise your kids and the kind of states where you want to retire too. The states we're going to talk about all share those qualities. To determine the safest states in the US, we needed to do some research. We analyzed the FBI reporting index for the number of violent and property crimes per capita in each year since 2010. There might be some surprises on this list, but when you look at the unbiased data, it's hard to argue against. So feel free to leave your doors unlocked as we present the safest states in America. Our first stop on our safe tour of America brings us to Kentucky. I'm sure lots of people in the South might be like, that's crazy, but when you look at the data, it's hard to argue against. You'd have to drive all the way to Iowa or Pennsylvania to get a safer place outside of Kentucky. Kentuckians are a pretty lucky group of people, seeing as how they rank 6th lowest for number of robberies, car thefts, and identity thefts each year. Only 10,000 cars were stolen in this state, and only 20,000 robberies occurred here in the last reporting year. While it's sad that's a low number, for America, it is. There's a good chance you won't have to worry about people committing crimes as often, and typically when someone does something wrong, everyone in town knows who done it.
It's Mr. Willett, the city engineer.
Our next stop on our safe tour in America brings us to Wyoming. That probably makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? Sure, there's only about 500,000 people in the cowboy state, and people are spaced out a lot more than they are in places like Florida and California. But look at New Mexico. There's some wide open spaces there too, and that's the most dangerous state in the whole country. Only about 1,100 people were the victim of an aggravated assault in Wyoming, meaning there's a good chance you can walk around here at night without having to watch your back. In fact, you might have a better chance of being trampled by a bison than beaten by a mugger. In Wyoming, people don't steal. It's sort of a Wyoming thing, unless you want to take some leftovers from a neighborhood trash can. I think most Wyomings would be cool with that. Making our way up to the northeast for the first time, we come to Rhode Island. Sure, it's a small state, and the number of property crimes is higher than in other states on this list, but overall you could find a much more dangerous place to live. Rhode Island saw only 540 robberies for the entire year last year, which is about 1.5 a day. Does that make you jealous of where you live? Many of Rhode Island's safest cities report no more than 2 murders a year, and 80% of Rhode Island's cities reported no murders. And robberies are limited to just a small part of the state for the most part. Heck, there were probably more crimes on Gilligan's Island on a given summer than there were on Rhode Island. Right next door to Rhode Island is the safe state of Connecticut. Most Americans might think of Connecticut as a wealthy place, and for the most part, they'd be right. Does a relatively rich group of people commit less crime? Apparently so. There were only 2,700 reported robberies in Connecticut for the entire last reporting year, which is well below the national average. Additionally, Connecticut saw 763 reported rapes in the same year too. That's crazy low. Workplace violence and even school bullying is lower in Connecticut. And when you come home from work here, it's likely the pets aren't trying to kill themselves either. This might come as a surprise, or maybe not, but Virginia is a really safe place to live. Seeing as how the population's really high, you might think there would be lots of crime. You'd be wrong. The Commonwealth is actually 4th safest when it comes to violent crimes in the entire country. You'd have to drive pretty far north to see a place where there are less violent crimes per capita than here. Outside of places like Portsmouth, Danville, and Norfolk, Virginia is a safe haven for most crimes. And Virginia has taken the lead and is in the top 5 states in America for addressing school place safety. That means lots of parents can rest easy all day long that their kids don't have to run home every day after school. Kudos to the Virginia State Police for cracking down on crime as soon as it rears its ugly head. Coming in as our 5th safest state in America is New Jersey? No way! Yes, that's correct. This goes to show that just because people are packed on top of one another doesn't mean they have to act uncivilized. You might be shocked to learn that Jersey has the 2nd lowest property crime rate in the entire country. Suburban and countryside areas are very safe, along with most Jersey Shore towns. If you've ever been to Jersey, you know, most of the crime is packed into places like Camden and Newark. Here, you might have to really think about who your friends are, and you might find meth is the leisure activity of choice. But you take those 2 cities out of the equation and you've got an even more really awesome safe place to live. Is it a surprise that Idaho is the 4th safest state to live in the US of A? Probably not. Idaho might get a knock for being a relatively boring place, but talk to the people that live there. When it's quiet, it's safe. Idaho saw only 3 murders a month on average, which is far less than the national average. Additionally, there were only about 6,300 burglaries in the last reporting year, which might sound like a lot, but that only averages out to about 125 a week for the entire state. In lots of parts of Idaho, people don't even bother to lock their doors at all. And not too long ago, Boise was named as the 9th safest city in the entire world. That sure puts things into perspective. If your cow shows up missing in Idaho, it's probably just at the neighbor's house. If your car breaks down here, somebody will give you a lift to work. And when your friend borrows your tractor in Idaho, they usually return it better than it was when they borrowed it. If you've ever been to Maine, you're probably not surprised it's our 3rd best state to live in America. Maine's the place to be if you want to avoid murder, rape, and other violent crimes. Maybe the colder weather chills people out. In Maine, there were less than 0.001 violent crimes per capita in the last reporting year. To put that into perspective, in Alaska, there were 0.008 violent crimes per person. Just wow. Of great importance to Mainers is a strong sense of community. What happens to you happens to me, good and bad. They're all in it together, which really helps keep crime to a minimum. Neighbors support their local sports teams. People pitch in to help one another. And you can bet that residents in Maine are proud of their accomplishments. We're going to remain in the Northeast for the rest of our list as we take a safety stroll through Vermont. Vermont's the 2nd lowest in the country for violent crime in the past 8 years. In fact, there were only 14 murders in the entire state of Vermont for the last reporting year. In some large cities in America, they see that on a bad weekend. While violence across America has decreased since 2010, Vermont has seen an especially large decrease. Perhaps it's the rural nature of Vermont, where people have a much deeper sense of community and watch out for one another. Or maybe it's the fact that many Vermonters own guns. Or maybe it's the legalization of weed that's made people in Vermont so chill. After all, it would be really hard to rob a bank, or even run off with stuff from your neighbor's garden if you've been smoking pot all day. Especially if this guy's your local sheriff. And where's the safest state in America? Is it much of a surprise to hear that it's New Hampshire? It's official. Just about the entire New England area north of New York State is actually a really safe place to be. In the last reporting year, there were only 17 murders for the entire year in Maine, which is astoundingly low. The leading state, California, saw nearly 100 times that number. People in New Hampshire live in small towns and rural areas, but are quite educated and most have great jobs. The schools are highly rated too. These factors also play a part in making New Hampshire a safe place. For the most part, the only thing you have to really worry about in New Hampshire is the idiots that text and drive in the snow. It seems like the biggest crime here is not being an annoying Patriots fan. New Hampshire is a place where people help one another and look out for each other's best interests and work together to keep their towns and communities safe. If you live in New Hampshire, you've certainly got it made. And if you live in any of the other states we mentioned on this list, pat yourselves on your backs. You've worked really hard to make your state a safe place, and you're certainly reaping the rewards.